Hello and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Sarah.
And I'm Ben.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Sarah. It's been a little interesting getting used to our new production schedule where we're recording things like pretty far in advance and our episodes are coming out at like a slower pace twice a month, roughly.
Hey, to that note, this one comes out on Christmas.
Is this the Christmas episode or is this our first episode in January?
No, this is Christmas.
Oh, wow.
Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody. This is also our first episode that we're recording, I think, since season 2 started airing. I don't know. It's just a little weird for me to get used to. There's a couple of things I want to talk about right off the bat. But first off, how are you doing, Sarah?
Well, as of recording, I'm great. When people are listening, I will be recovering from surgery.
That's true.
I'm having surgery in early December. Everything's fine. But it is a very exciting surgery. I'm very excited for it.
So a couple of notes that I want to say because of the production schedule changing, there's like stuff that has happened that I haven't been able to address yet that now like won't get addressed until way later than I'm saying this, but like it's good to say it so it's on the record. So the first thing I want to talk about is our Patreon at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast. If you are a patron, or if you're considering becoming a patron, our Patreon offers a lot of cool like bonus content, but also just helps support us in putting on the show. Don't subscribe on Apple devices. Now, you've probably heard about this from like a lot of other Patreons that you support if you support a lot of them. But in case you haven't, Apple is now taking a massive cut of any money that you send to a Patreon if you are signed up through iOS. Essentially, I think it's like 20% or something of the money that you are sending just gets eaten by Apple before it gets to us if you're signed up on iOS. So if you were considering signing up for our Patreon, do so on a different platform. Get on an Android or a PC or a browser or something. And if you are signed up like through an iOS device, I would recommend like canceling your subscription and signing up through a different platform.
That's so bonkers. I don't understand how that works because Patreon is a website. So how...
They have an app on the App Store.
Yeah, but like that is wild, and I really hope that people are able to push up against this because this sets a very bad precedent for any kind of thing. Like even if you have PayPal through the App Store or whatever, like that's what the fuck is Apple doing? Mm-hmm. What are they going to get? Like a couple pennies on the dollar? Like that's not worth it. Shooting yourself in the foot. I didn't know about this until now. So this is my honest reaction.
I support a lot of Patreons, as does Scream Scene. And so I had heard a lot about it, but it was one of those things where I heard about it after we recorded the most recent episode. It has already gone into effect by the time we're recording this episode. It'll be quite a few months old by the time listeners hear this. But, you know, better late than never. For this information if you, like Sarah, had not heard about this. The other announcement that I would like to say, which will also be old by the time you hear this, is we're now on Blue Sky. And so you can find Castle Scream Scene under a nice clear blue sky at screamscene.bsky.social. So if you are looking to migrate social media to a new platform, you can find us on Blue Sky.
We'll still have Twitter. We just will not be active on it. And our very last post will be like, here's where to find us. So if you do just navigate to Twitter, you'll still find your way over to Blue Sky.
And then before we start into talking about this week's movie, on a broader sense, we are now finally entering 1961. And because of that, there's an update in the production code that I can talk about.
Oh, okay.
So by 1961, the Production Code of America is becoming increasingly irrelevant. A lot of movies are bucking it, including like big studio pictures. We've seen quite a few by now in other genres that just are being not released with MPAA approval. And the way that that's happening, the way they're able to get around the production code is just like not submitting the film for approval. And at this point, traditionally theaters, especially like theaters with a lot of like family sort of customers and that aimed for a wide audience, not inner city theaters, in other words, wouldn't put a movie in if it didn't have an MPAA seal. But as bigger and bigger budget movies with like bigger and bigger name stars that have like more and more buzz around them are doing it, those theaters' hands are kind of getting forced. But the production code is still in effect, and there are still like a lot of theaters that are following it, and a lot of films that are still following it at this time. But in response to, this increased rebellion, the production code is sort of finding that it needs to revise itself to keep up with the times. Now, the big revision in 1961 has to do with a provision in the production code that prevents the portrayal of what the code calls sexual perversions.
Okay.
And the new language that is replacing that in 1961 is that care and attention should be given to the portrayal of sexual aberrations.
So aberrations as in like monstrosities, like the Dungeons and Dragons sense?
So in both the case of sexual perversions and sexual aberrations, what we're really talking about here is homosexuality.
Okay.
And we're going from a straight up ban on the topic to, care and attention should be shown. These should be subject matter treated with a soft touch, with kid gloves, not to be used for exploitative purposes, this kind of thing. And this is really coming out of like, stage plays like Tea and Sympathy getting adapted to motion pictures, and, plays like The Children's Hour getting adapted to motion pictures, and kind of this push of like, can we talk about this, in movies?
So there's been no, like, in all of history, I guess we'll say American history, there's been no kind of push to censor Broadway material or theater material in the same way that you could say that the production code is done for film.
Yeah, well, the thing you have to remember about Broadway material is twofold. One is that like Broadway is a specific location in New York, and that like the big productions here are happening in New York. And as much as like there's wide attendance, it's not nearly the kind of wide attendance that you're seeing to like films, right? It's like, hey, could you get to this theater to see this play at this time? You're mostly advertising to, New York elites, I guess you could say. And then if that production is traveling out of Broadway, if it's a big enough hit, the other advantage you have about Broadway plays is like, if you sort of are looking at the crowd and you're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't say this word or that word, you can just change lines on the fly, right? But certainly we were getting more and more stories that were broaching these kinds of subjects of quote unquote aberrant sexuality. And so, we're not saying that we're opening up like a floodgate to homosexual stories, but we're saying, like, if it's necessary to the plot of your movie to have content like this, we emphasize that, like, care and attention should be shown to how you're portraying it.
All right. Well, a step in the right direction.
I suspect that where this might affect the horror genre the most is in how confidently films feel in replying to Psycho.
Yeah, that's very fair.
So with that out of the way, we can talk about what we're watching this week.
Does it have any relationship to what we just talked about with the production code? Like,
no, not at all.
Would any of those changes have come in time for, like...
None of those changes would have come in time for this movie, and I'm almost certain that this movie didn't bother with submitting itself to the code anyways.
Okay. What are we watching today, Ben?
This week, Sarah, we are watching The Dead One from 1961, directed by Barry Mahon, also known as Blood of a Zombie.
Great. You know how I feel about zombies.
Well, we're still in the realm of voodoo zombies here. And, I feel like the thing that bothers you a lot when we watch zombie movies is, like, the crowds pressing in on a victim. And this is just the dead one.
A singular.
So I think maybe there's just one zombie in this movie, which, like, that's fine.
I can deal with one.
Yeah. The Dead One is a regional horror film, and you may be asking yourself, what does that mean?
Yeah. What does that mean, Ben?
Well, a regional film is defined as a movie shot outside the sort of geographical and professional definitions of Hollywood, made by independent filmmakers with a cast and crew drawn from the region where filming took place and largely released to theaters in that region. So in the case of The Dead One, it was filmed on location in and around New Orleans, Louisiana, by a production company called Mardi Gras Films. It was one of only 2 pictures made by that company. The movie's cast was drawn from locals in that area, and because of that, very little is known about them. And upon release on January 13th, 1961, Mardi Gras distributed the picture primarily to drive-in theaters in the southern part of the country. And the movie's biggest claim to fame is that it is one of the first zombie movies released in color. Potentially the first zombie movie released in color. It's a little uncertain when you're dealing with a movie
that's released regionally.
And also the other candidate for the story is going to be the movie we're watching in the next episode, which was a UK film. And it becomes a little bit difficult to judge, like, who really got there first between UK and US because of the fact that we don't have, like,
worldwide release
dates. Exactly. Yeah. For my money, I think this one is probably safe to be considered first, mostly because I saw some evidence that in some territories it came out in late 1960, even though the general release date is given as January 13th, 1961.
Is it because that's a Friday?
I don't know, actually.
Because that would be fun.
That would be fun. But yeah, this is a zombie movie, but we are still in the realm of the traditional voodoo zombie. I feel like it's been a while. What was the last, like, zombie movie we saw?
So that's a complicated question to answer.
Okay.
I probably go into most detail about Haitian voodoo in particular with White Zombie from 1932. That's episode 32. As well as I Walked with a Zombie from 1943, episode 104. We did have a few voodoo movies in 1957. We had Voodoo Woman and Voodoo Island.
I think Voodoo Island's the one maybe I'm thinking of.
So Voodoo Island is episode 200. Voodoo Woman is episode 206. So pretty back to back. But also in 1957 was Zombies of Moratau, episode 203.
Is Zombies of Moratau the one with the like plantation house and the swamps?
Like, yes, but we're technically in Africa.
Oh.
But it is kind of a missing link. That was a big theme when we were covering that movie, was that it felt like a missing link more towards the way we think about zombies today.
Okay.
Because they were dead people.
Right.
Like literally dead people.
Right. So do you want to break down like what those distinctions all are? Since it has been 100 and some episodes then?
Yes. So obviously this movie is set in Louisiana.
Also, wait. Can I just draw attention to the fact that White Zombie in like 1932 is episode 32, right? I Walked with a Zombie 10 years later, early 40s, is like episode 104. So like 70 episodes later, right?
Yes.
Zombies of Moratau, 1957. So like almost 20 years later, is episode like 203 or whatever. So like almost 100 episodes later. And now from 1957 to 61, so like 3 to 4 years, we're in episode like 313 or something now. So like 100 episodes to get through the last like 3 years.
Yeah, man.
That's crazy.
We've been busy bees. So
no wonder we got burned out. Jesus.
Okay, so this movie, it is set in Louisiana. So there's Louisiana voodoo. But let me take you back to Haitian voodoo, because that's mostly been what we've been covering up till now.
Got it.
So Haitian voodoo really comes from the mix of Central and West African beliefs with Roman Catholicism kind of mapped onto it due to the slave trade taking folks from West Africa and specifically taking them to Haiti. Haiti at that time is French, so very French equals very Roman Catholic. And in order to continue practicing their African beliefs, which were kind of outlawed because the hope was to kind of like completely remove the slaves from their African heritage, a lot of the beliefs kind of got mapped to the different saints of Catholicism. Now, Haitian voodoo has a lot of drumming and singing. It's where you hear about sacrifices, divination with spirits. Zombies are considered black magic. You can have both like good and black magic. And the reason why zombies are considered particularly bad is because you are enslaved in death as well as having been enslaved in life.
Right, because like voodoo zombies are basically like mind-controlled servants, kind of.
Basically, voodoo as a religious practice is incredibly tied to the Haitian Revolution. What a great way to build community, to create a revolution then through religious practice like that. And so that revolution was 1791 to 1801, and that overthrew the French government. A lot of the folks who left Haiti at that time with their slaves headed to New Orleans, but probably more broadly, Louisiana. So Louisiana becomes a melting pot of French, African, and later Spanish peoples. They have similar diasporic origins of voodoo, including with the fact that, like, as I said, a lot of the evacuating the people, the colonizers and bad people who were leaving Haiti came to Louisiana. But also during the slave trade, slaves also went to Louisiana. And so you still had that kind of practice from Africa. Voodoo was kind of underground throughout the 1800s, notably because there were laws in place that would prevent groups of Black people getting together. So very hard to practice religion.
Sure,
as one example. Towards this time, right now in 1960, the Louisiana tourism industry is really latching onto voodoo imagery as a reason to visit us.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so we're starting to commercialize this shit.
Yes. Which, I mean, you can kind of understand the impulse because the 50s had a lot of the like Hawaiian stuff,
Sure.
tiki bars.
Right, yeah.
So this is like, another opportunity to commercialize this kind of very like visually significant, visually compelling
Local culture. Yeah.
So with Louisianan voodoo, it trends towards being more focused on charms that you would use to protect yourself or use to harm someone.
Okay.
There's still an emphasis on like herbs and poisons and, using these different materials to do something. But one thing that I noticed in research is Haiti was very focused on like that communal like drumming circle and like coming together to worship towards a divinity that's like with the worship led by a priest or a priestess. In Louisiana, it's very like, I'm going to, in the terms that they would use of the day, to a witch doctor, and they will give me an amulet or some kind of idol, and that's what I will use. It's very like almost an individual level.
Which makes sense if you're having to practice it on an individual scale because you have to kind of like hide it away because you can't do those big congregations.
Exactly. And the idea of voodoo dolls is really centralized within Louisianan voodoo.
Okay.
So I'm a Canadian, obviously. So like this is all, I don't know a huge amount about American history, right?
Right.
But Louisiana was purchased in 1803 to become part of the States.
Yes.
And when that happened in 1803, there was a lot of mixing of Black communities in with the wider states.
Sure.
And seeing voodoo practice became more widespread. So more people are aware of it. And it was very much considered like very exotic, but also primitive and taken as an example of like why Black people are inherently more primitive than white people.
Sure.
As voodoo iconography became more widespread, there became almost a flattening of the differences between Louisianan, Haitian, and Cuban voodoo.
Sure. Like as you're getting more mass media depiction, everything kind of gets homogenized together.
Yes. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention free women of color, free Black women. They were allowed to practice voodoo, and that's allowed with like asterisks because it was still kind of under the table, but it was seen as like, I get to go to like, how people would be like, I'm going to go talk to like my Wiccan friend.
Okay, sure.
It'd be like, I'm going to go talk to, I'm speaking particularly of Marie Laveau. She ran a beauty parlor and a beauty salon, and women would go and be like, she also happens to practice voodoo. She's a little clairvoyant. She was a herbalist, a midwife, but people would go to her to get some of these amulets and things like that. So she lived 1801 to 1881. She's a very big figure in New Orleans in particular, so I wanted to make sure to mention her. And she is kind of there were others, but she's a really good example of finding ways to legitimize this religious practice through having that freedom.
Sure.
She's not enslaved. She's not, obviously there are laws that are still like oppressing that religious practice, but she is still able to leverage.
It's a lot easier to break the law when you yourself are not enslaved.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah. As covered in episode 32 on White Zombie, the 1940s saw a big documentation of voodoo, specifically in Haiti, and ethnographic evaluations of voodoo. As I mentioned, as we head into the 60s, there's that big tourism push. But I saw a lot of research also pointing to the fact that as we get further into the 60s, of course, the civil rights movement laid groundwork for legitimizing a specifically Black religion.
Sure.
Which is complicated in and of itself because of that past baggage, for lack of a better word, of voodoo being taken as evidence for Black people being more primitive and inherently primitive.
Right.
But that's not for this podcast.
Yeah. I could certainly see why the civil rights movement would potentially want to avoid anything that helps white people see Blacks as primitive. But I could also see why the civil rights movement would want to latch on to like specifically Black cultural practices. And then you have the fact that like that push-pull between like Martin Luther King was like a reverend, right? But then also like Malcolm X was very famously like
Muslim.
Yeah, Nation of Islam. And yeah, there's a lot going on there. There's also the fact that like voodoo, as you mentioned, like is kind of a combination of you know, traditional West African practices with Catholic practices and all kinds of melting pot stuff. But that's what New Orleans is all about, right? You take everybody you find there and you throw them in a gumbo and you call it Creole and that's that's what we're doing.
With the asterisk of, I can't remember if gumbo is more Creole or Cajun.
Sure.
They are different things.
Yes.
We do recognize
Creole
that.
and Cajun are two different things.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, so that is kind of the...
But jambalaya is very tasty.
So is gumbo. I make gumbo all the time because I fell in love with it when I was in New Orleans. Anyways, that's where we are at with voodoo.
Gotcha. Yeah, so these are... At this point, like a zombie is someone who has been, quote, brought back from the dead, unquote, by like a witch doctor to perform tasks.
Yes. And that has been also what we've seen in all of the media portrayals as well. Like I said, with Zombies of Moratau, it kind of became a little bit like closer to the idea of like you are legitimately dead and you rise back up. Previously, it's been like you go comatose and are presumed dead and then rise, but you're actually alive.
Yeah, and that was also the difference between like what a zombie is supposed to be and what a zombie is. And by that, what I mean is like the belief is that you die and you're brought back. What was actually happening had to do with like a particular kind of poison that rendered you like sort
comatose.
Of semi-comatose, but then susceptible to suggestion.
Yeah.
Right. So what the real practice was versus what the superstition around it was. I think the big thing in Zombies of Moratau was that it was sort of the first time we had like people holed up in a house that was under attack by like a group of zombies, which felt significant. And I just bring all this up because we sometimes forget where this all came from. Right.
Absolutely.
So The Dead One, as a film, was a production of Barry Mahon, who directed, produced, and wrote this movie.
Okay. Triple threat.
Yes. He was born Jackson Barrett Mann in Bakersfield, California, or maybe Santa Barbara, California, in 1921. And the best source on his life, the one that's cited on like Wikipedia, on IMDb, in all these places, is filmmaker James Yeager, who is mostly known for making political documentaries for HBO, much younger than Barry Mann. But he befriended Mann later in life after Mann retired, and like Mann told Yeager all the stories about his life. And so Yeager's the guy who's sort of around to tell us about Mann. And Yeager's biography paints an extremely flattering view of Mann that sort of smells like bullshit to me. But nevertheless, it's
all you have.
Right. It's the biography we've got. So I'm going to report it and I'll just comment.
Giant asterisk over here.
Giant asterisk. And I'm also going to comment about the stuff that I feel is like kind of...
a bridge too far.
Yeah, the stuff that I feel most strongly needs that asterisk, let's say. So Mann grew up in California and supposedly learned how to fly while in high school. That is, fly planes. And he joined the Royal Air Force in Britain in 1941, flying combat missions with Eagle Squadron, which was an RAF squadron composed entirely of American volunteers. So this was during a period when, America was not yet officially at war. And so if you were really enthusiastic about wanting to go and fight, young men would go overseas and sign up as volunteers in foreign air forces, which is what was the case here. Mann flew a number of combat missions through 1941 and 1942, including like air cover for commando missions. He earned flying ace status at Dieppe, which means he shot down confirmed 5 enemy planes. I guess he was confirmed for 5, and there's like 3 more that maybe he shot down. His Spitfire was shot down during Dieppe and crashed over the sea, and Mann was taken prisoner. He was imprisoned at Stalag Luft 3, where he claimed to have worked on the tunnels that were used in what is known as the Great Escape in 1944. And he also claims to have been the inspiration for Steve McQueen's character in the movie adaptation of The Great Escape.
I see what you mean here. There's a big asterisk over here right now.
This is almost certainly, in my opinion, not true. I will say this for a couple reasons. The first is, so Americans did help with The Great Escape, but no Americans escaped in The Great Escape. However, in the movie, they made Americans into the heroes and people who escaped for like commercial reasons. Steve McQueen's character in that movie is, if you look at anything about the making of that movie, a fictionalized composite of like 3 different pilots who were POWs at Stalag Luft 3, none of whom are named Barry Mann. So our source for Steve McQueen is based on Barry Mann is Barry Mann, and not anything involved with the production of The Great Escape. Now, Mann claimed to have escaped Stalag Luft 3, but then to have been recaptured at the Czech border, and then to have finally been liberated by Patton's Third Army in 1945, which means from an objective perspective, Mann was liberated by Patton's Third Army in 1945, because we only have Mann's word to go for on the escape and the recapture and stuff. But that's what he says. Mann's biography goes on to state that after the war, he became Errol Flynn's personal pilot and business manager. He told James Yeager that, Errol Flynn was not homosexual, was what he told Yeager, although he may have tried it once or twice. He explicitly told Yeager that all of the stories that you ever hear about Flynn are bullshit, which is really funny that then we're meant to believe the stories that Mann tells about Flynn. But whatever. He was Errol Flynn's personal pilot and business manager, and it is said in his biography that Mann produced a number of the films of Errol Flynn and Italian sex symbol Gina Lollobrigida. Do you know what? He produced a number of films starring those 2 stars. Would you like to guess the number?
0.
1. The greater truth of this is that, yes, Mann and Flynn were buddies, but this is in the 1950s when Flynn's career was way on the downslope. And that what happened was Mann failed to produce Flynn's movie, The Story of William Tell, which was a production that Flynn tried to self-finance in Italy after Hollywood wouldn't make movies with him anymore, and then never really got made. They shot a couple minutes of footage before production shut down. That abortive production cost Flynn $400,000 of his own money, which then required Flynn to stay in Italy and make swashbuckling movies to pay the bills. And Mann co-produced one of those, a film called Crossed Swords, which came out in 1954 and starred Flynn and Lollobrigida. So that one film is what we're using to say that Mann produced a number of films starring Flynn and Lollobrigida. Now, Crossed Swords flopped, and Mann didn't make another movie until 1951, when he produced and directed Girls Incorporated.
That sounds like a great movie.
It is the first in a long series of softcore nudie movies that Mann would produce and direct for the next 10 years. Mann would make one other picture with Flynn, Cuban Rebel Girls.
Oh my God.
In 1959, which was sort of like semi-fictionalized, semi-documentary about 50-year-old Errol Flynn and his 17-year-old girlfriend, and their support for the brave romantic rebellion of Fidel Castro, who Flynn strongly admired because Flynn interpreted the Cuban Revolution as being romantic in some way. And this was Flynn's final film before he died that same year.
How did he die?
Essentially alcoholism.
Okay.
Essentially
It wasn't the American government being like, you support Castro?
No. Cuban Rebel Girls was a little B movie. It's apparently not very good.
Really? With a title like that?
Mann's biography goes on to then sing his praises for creating the Production Machine, a high-tech, high-output production company in Hollywood that made tons of movies and was filled with innovations, including the first use of computer programming to make spreadsheets to plan productions and budgets for Columbia Pictures, no less.
I feel like if that was true, I probably would have heard of Barry Mahon before.
The truth of the matter is that, yes, Mann did have a high output and produced a lot of movies, and that output was nudie flicks for 10 years on the exploitation circuit, as well as one sci-fi picture in 1960 and this one horror movie in 1961. Mann was very far from Hollywood. The Dead One was shot in Louisiana. Rocket Attack USA was shot in New Jersey and is specifically an anti-Sputnik, Soviet Cold War fears movie.
Okay.
The nudie flicks were shot in New York. And then in 1969, he switched tracks dramatically from the nudie flicks to making kiddie matinee pictures shot in Florida, starting with The Wonderful Land of Oz, an adaptation of the second Oz book from 1904. And his final film was Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny in 1972.
So he switched because he wanted to retire in Florida instead of New York. Mm-hmm. And probably easier to make children's movies down there.
Well, and if you're looking at movies that can be made cheaply and that will make a good return on investment, nobody in the early 70s gave a shit about the quality of children's films.
Yeah, why would they?
Exactly, especially live action children's films. And you just threw them into theaters on Saturdays and they were a babysitter, right?
Yeah.
Now, Mann said, and this is a quote from him rather than from Yeager, Mann said that he was never focused on making any one picture particularly good, but rather on being the Henry Ford of movies, cranking out cheap and reliable Model Ts at scale for a successful business. So the idea being to just keep making movies. He made something 60 to 70 movies of these nudie pictures and kiddie shows. Just making as many movies as you can and supporting the business through scale production of formulaic features so that no one movie can bring down the whole thing, but also you're not investing into making one movie something where you're pinning all your hopes on it being a hit.
Yeah, man, that's just business.
Right.
That's just we've seen it with the studio system. We've seen it with Roger Corman. Mm-hmm. There's nothing unique about that.
Right.
Not that everything needs to be absolutely unique for someone to be considered a genius, but what you were telling me is not smelling like a genius.
What I think is hilarious is that the fact that he made low budget exploitation programmers is not explicitly mentioned in his IMDb or Wikipedia biographies. It's just oh yeah, he made a bunch of Errol Flynn and Gina Lollobrigida movies, and he also had this production company that just had this really high output, and he produced dozens of films over the course of his amazing career. And you don't realize what kind of movies he made until you look at his list of credits.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's right. Yeah. dozens and dozens of, skin flicks is what we're talking about here.
Honestly, I'm surprised people didn't transition to doing more kids stuff earlier. Like whether that's Man or I don't know if Corman ever did, but much wider release than a nudie flick,
Well, you can sell it to TV.
That
right?
too.
Yeah.
A lot more money to be made, I would imagine.
From what I understand, Rocket Attack USA and The Wonderful Land of Oz both got Mystery Science Theater 3000 episodes. This film did not, because for a long time this movie was considered lost.
Oh.
Because when it came out, the prints went out to drive-in theaters. They got shown. And that was the end of it. Who cares? And it wasn't sold to TV. It didn't get home video releases. And so it was considered lost until the early 2000s when it began to show up on DVD again. What I do think is interesting about The Dead One is it shows how by 1961, even low-budget pictures were beginning to get access to elements previously reserved for A-movies. So, The Dead One is shot in color, right? That's its big claim to fame. Now, it was shot in Eastman color, which, of course, is a lot easier and cheaper than Technicolor, which is a huge hassle to shoot in. But also The Dead One uses an anamorphic widescreen process called Ultrascope, which is just a German knockoff of CinemaScope. So we're getting this is an extremely low budget indie regional horror movie shot in color and widescreen, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of cool.
Contemporary reviews basically said that the movie is good for what it is, that the acting is plodding and the direction is uninspired, but that shouldn't matter to horror addicts, and that the movie is moderately entertaining.
We'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Modern reviews are much more negative, calling the picture threadbare, Ed Wood level, wooden, abominable, and maybe racist?
Yeah, I can see racism being a potential thing that you would have to navigate given the subject matter.
For sure, yeah.
I'm assuming Barry Mann is white?
Yes. Given everything about his life, yes. And I guess the sort of, from what I understand, having not seen it yet, the heroes are white and the villains are black is kind of what we're looking at.
It's going to be another Black Moon situation potentially.
Yeah, we will see, I guess.
Well, how are we watching this?
So, we live in a wild era for low budget, 5 people saw this in a theater once in Toulouse kind of horror movies, in that these are the movies that are most profitable to put out on fully restored, decked out Blu-rays these days. Nobody's going to go pay for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness on Blu-ray. They're going to watch it on Disney Plus. But if Severin Films comes around and they're like, hey, we have a 4K restoration of The Dead One from 1961, they can absolutely put that Blu-ray up for $35 on their website and sell it like hotcakes. So that's how we're watching it.
Well, folks, hopefully you can find a copy to watch along. We are going to watch The Dead One from 1961, aka Blood of the Zombie, directed by Barry Mann.
See you on the other side, everybody. Welcome back to Scream Scene, everybody. We just finished watching The Dead One from 1961, directed by Barry Mann. Sarah, what did you think?
It wasn't very good. I do agree with the review that you shared before that was it's good for what it is. It's not trying to be anything more than it is. But what's frustrating is, it's working on top of a ton of material that is rich for a writer specifically a horror writer to mine into, and it just doesn't.
Yeah, very true. I think my reaction was that this is not that bad on the grand scheme of cheap indie horror movies.
Like, it's no Bodine.
It's about on a level with movies I made in high school. Maybe some better lighting, worse sound.
Definitely worse sound. It definitely struggles with sound, especially when we're on the street in New Orleans. I did appreciate where it hit in that uncanny valley for budgets of shooting on location. I miss New Orleans. It's a really lovely place. Definitely recommend people go to visit.
But I do agree with you that, like, we're skimming along the surface of material you could do much more interesting things with.
That we've seen horror B movies dig into. Like, I think you could point to even times that The Mummy has dug into some of this stuff, and like,
well, yeah, and you're not even a big fan of White Zombie, and I think White Zombie does a better job of looking at this material.
Don't send people at me. I do appreciate White Zombie. It's just the sound hurts my ears sometimes. Yeah, let's go into the synopsis.
For sure.
So this movie does a lot of filler for time, so I'm just going to stick with like what is pertinent here. Johnny and Linda are married. According to Johnny's grandfather's will, the family plantation is now in Johnny's name. So he decides to honeymoon with Linda up at the plantation mansion to, kill two birds with one stone of sorting out the legal stuff in the same weekend. So as they're heading out of town from New Orleans out to, middle of nowhere, Louisiana, they pass by a dancer who they had seen on the stage doing belly dancing. Her name is Bella, who does belly dancing. Super original. Anyways, her car is broken down, so they pick her up on the way. Meanwhile, the thing about this movie is, when someone's trying to shoehorn in exposition of like, my husband Ben, who I've known for over 20 years and have been married for nearly 10. Mm-hmm. What lovely brown hair you have on this fine winter day. Mm-hmm. Everyone calls each other by like the familial relation. So there's cousin Monica. She calls Johnny cousin Johnny. Her brother is brother Jonas.
Sure.
Which always like caught my ear because I was like, you mean the Jonas brother?
I wonder if it's like I don't know, if you're listening to this and your family's from Louisiana, like is this a colloquialism down there?
I don't think so. So cousin Monica lives at and runs the plantation, and just so happens she also leads the voodoo rituals with the black workers there, who it is textual that they are descendants of the original slaves who worked this plantation. So cousin Monica's plan is to use her dead brother Jonas as a zombie to kill Linda, so that Johnny is therefore no longer married and therefore has no legal claim to own the plantation. During the second evening that they are staying at the plantation, Bella is still here because her car is still broken down. And when Jonas rises, he makes it to the mansion and kills Bella by mistake because he's just been told, go kill the woman. Johnny and Linda discover Bella dead, so they do the sensible thing of calling the cops, but it's going to take a little bit for them to arrive. So Linda gets kind of locked up in the bedroom with a gun while Johnny goes to investigate. While he's away, Jonas goes and attacks Linda. She shoots at him. There is kind of a neat moment where she shoots and the mirror that's behind Jonas gets like shattered. So it was like, okay, cool. Like you're putting some thought into some of this stuff. Johnny comes and helps Linda as soon as Jonas has already left.
Everybody keeps missing each other in the night. It's very comical.
Yeah, but Johnny doesn't believe Linda that it's a real zombie. He thinks it's just someone dressed up and they're trying to scare them. So they go together to the crypt so she can prove that the zombie was real. They see that the sarcophagus is open. No one is in there. And then Johnny sees that Jonas has made it into the crypt. Monica follows shortly. And it gets a little complicated from this point on. Basically, Monica is like, no, Jonas, you need to get back into your crypt before morning. Jonas is like, oh, here's the woman I'm trying to kill, and keeps trying to come at her. And then the cops arrive. And so they come into the crypt and they're like, what's going on here? No one move or I'll shoot. Blam, blam. Monica dies. Jonas gets mad at the cops and goes after them just as the sun is rising. And in, I believe, very like classic voodoo mythology and folklore, zombies crumble at the first break of dawn. Pretty sure that's real. This is sarcasm, to be explicitly clear. And so Johnny and Linda are like, well, at least the cops were here, so we have witnesses and they don't have to just take our word for it. Yeah, that's the end, basically. Johnny is putting up a for sale sign, and then the end appears. So that's it.
Yep.
Is there anything that, because I did skip over some things.
You didn't miss anything plot essential.
Yeah.
This movie has a lot of classic, cheap, indie movie telltale signs, okay? The bad sound is probably the biggest one, right? That's the biggest tell of a amateur production across the ages, I guess, since the 30s, I guess. Another telltale sign is the locked off camera angles that we see again and again for each location, where like each place gets one camera angle and they clearly just shot
one thing right after another.
Right. You know, the acting is bad. But it's not so bad, I think, as to be Ed Wood level bad. Probably just because the writing is a lot closer to how people actually talk rather than like an imitation of how people in movies talk.
I think that's a very apt description. I will say that some people are a little better than others. Mm-hmm. Monica doesn't work. Bella, is playing her part. She's doing a Betty Boop, Marilyn Monroe vibe because she's an exotic dancer.
Sure.
And Johnny is trying to do like some kind of like Gene Kelly, like strong jaw vibe.
Johnny is basically a kind of like well-meaning asshole.
Yeah.
Whereas Monica is like a sympathetic bitch.
Yeah.
And no one else is much of anything.
Yeah.
I think the biggest sign, other than the bad sound, that this is, a cheap kind of low-rent movie, is that we waste a lot of time.
Yeah, so before they head out to the plantation, we spend quite a bit of time in the French Quarter in New Orleans. So we go to several different dance nightclubs. The first one we go to is just like a traditional jazz, I guess you could say, of like a jazz trio. Then we go to a dance club where the dancers are on poles, if you know what I mean. And that's where we first get introduced to Bella. So, okay, had some purpose there. And then we go to kind of a jazz bandstand kind of location, which was really cool and fun. I did enjoy all of this.
Basically, like Johnny says that he wants to show Linda, New Orleans. And this is the excuse for us to go to 3 different bars and watch like 3 basically like full performances, from a succession of people. As you said, we get introduced to Bella in one of them, so it's almost relevant. But like this eats up a substantial chunk of time before we're even on our way to the plantation.
I think the movie is an hour and 10 minutes, mm-hmm. and we only get to the plantation maybe 20 minutes in.
Yeah, at the point of the movie where we're learning the exposition of how the will works and what Monica's like conflict with Johnny is, we are halfway through the movie, right? This movie really pads out everything it can do to hit feature length. And, as Sarah mentioned, like there's only one night where things happen. Mm-hmm. We get there that evening. The next day we get shown the plantation and get told all the exposition. We have one night of events, and then, the movie wraps up and we see, as you said, him putting up a for sale sign, and then we see them drive away. The other way that this movie pads time really is by going back to a very old-fashioned style of movie making, which is you need to show every character walk from each location to each other. Like if Johnny and Linda are going from their bedroom to the crypt, we're going to see them go down the stairs in the main house, walk outside by the main house, walk in like a field outdoors, and then like walk up to the crypt, right? Like we see every step.
Which also makes it very comical in the one night of action, because the camera doesn't really move from its location, because we're just going to shoot everyone walking past all at once. Mm-hmm. And so we see Johnny and Linda leave. Jonas, the zombie, walk in. And then when like people are coming back or leaving, Jonas carrying the dead Bella, leaving the house, walking back into the field. And then like in this, we don't cut in that same shot, Johnny and Linda walking back into the house.
Yeah, everybody just barely misses each other, basically. I will say that the zombie makeup is pretty good, especially considering that we never see it in a close-up. So
yeah, they did some really cool yellow skin. The face, you can tell they've done stuff to make it look hollowed. A lot of like makeup underneath the eyes. The actor as well is doing a pretty neat and pretty consistent physical performance. Mm-hmm. He does the Dracula hands as he comes out of the crypt, but I mean, I get it.
He's doing kind of a Frankenstein walk with the arms outstretched in front of him, right? But yeah, it's like not a bad makeup. He's got like long stringy hair. He's dressed in his tuxedo, which is a funny image.
Yeah, he died right before his wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it, the zombie makeup was pretty well done.
There is only one.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the title, right? Mm-hmm. The dead one.
Yeah.
I do kind of wish we did get a close-up, because you could tell they put a lot of effort into it.
There aren't a lot of close-ups for anyone in this movie. Most of this movie is shot from like a proscenium full wide. Occasionally we'll move in for like a medium 2 shot, but like I can't off the top of my head think of a real big close-up. I think that this is probably because of the ultrascope that they shot in, this anamorphic widescreen. If you're not an experienced director, it can be hard to figure out how to frame a close-up well with that ultra-wide screen.
I was figuring it was just, no time to set up a whole new shot when we've already got what we need.
Oh, totally. It's absolutely that as well, right? Yeah. There's no artistry here, just like Barry Mahon would have preferred. We're just making it.
This movie does have the, what I'll call the mummy problem of like, why are you making the monster do the killing when you yourself can just go and kill the person?
Yes, 100%. Because it's like, in order to get Jonas to do stuff, what Monica needs to do is she needs to basically like round up all the workers on the plantation. They go to like the slave quarters where like the slaves were kept back in slave times, and they like get drumming on the voodoo drums, and they do a whole like ceremony, and she's got like voodoo dolls that she's had to have made, and she's like calling out for Jonas to rise, and then like Jonas has to get like up out of his sarcophagus in the crypt and then shamble over to the house and shamble up the goddamn stairs, which he is clearly not very well suited to doing, and do all this. And if they stop drumming for any period of time, he turns around and goes back to the crypt. At one point, when they realize that he's gotten the wrong girl, she has to like run around and get everybody back together. Like, no, we fucked up. Everybody come back. Like, places everybody. Like, we got to go again. It's so much harder.
Like, if there was something like, so we've been watching a lot of Columbo.
Yeah.
So if it was something that like, oh, you're doing this so you can set up that you have an alibi, cool. But this, like, that's not the...
No, yeah. Like she wants to kill Linda, doesn't seem to be including Johnny in the plan, which...
Well, because he's family, Ben.
Sure. Listen, I will also say, I think Monica's legal reading on this is a little off. Like, I'm no property lawyer, but if the way that the will works is once Johnny gets married, he takes ownership of the plantation, I feel like he doesn't lose ownership of the plantation if he stops being married. I don't know.
Yeah. It's not like even if there was a divorce, you're still like exes. Like, it's not like the marriage never literally happened in the legal sense.
Right, exactly. And so to me, like, if you're going to kill the wife so that he's now no longer technically married, so that he doesn't own the plantation, so you can keep having the plantation, why not just kill him? Because especially, like, if she gets Jonas to kill Linda, like, what was her plan? What was she going to say to Johnny? Like, he'd be like, where's my wife? And she'd be like, I don't know. And then just, I guess, try to ride that forever.
Oh, man, this could have been like a whole new version of The Fugitive, of him being like, I didn't kill my wife. It was a zombie man.
Right. This is a ludicrously overcomplicated way to just kill one person.
Yes. So when Johnny is like, yeah, my family owns a plantation, I was like, ooh. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, here are the old slave quarters. Ooh. Mm-hmm. And Linda's clearly like, oh, wow, like where they used to like lock people up like animals. And Johnny's like, yeah, don't worry. That was a long time ago. And it's like, sir, this is within your fucking lifetime, because you were talking about how your grandfather did this shit and you would run around playing as a child. Like, sir, this is like us. He is so fucking delusional. Just let me rant. Your whole, like, I see you, Ben. I see you. But like, what the fuck? And we do get some footage of the plantation workers, what their living conditions are like. There are these 3 children who are like, I think it's supposed to be like a kind of creepy moment of children playing, but it's like spooky. But we see them like all 3 in a single bed in a single room house. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's a fucking mansion up there. Like, you don't, because here's the other thing, like, fucking Johnny, when the voodoo drums start going, and like they're going like really hard and he can hear them in the house, he's like, I think Monica's been too lenient.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck are you talking about, guy?
Okay, so to be fair, this is what I mean when I say Johnny's a well-meaning asshole, right? So like, he grew up on a plantation and he clearly has like, very rose-tinted glasses about the place. Now, one of the big sources of conflict here is that Monica has continued to live on the plantation her whole life, while Johnny went into the city and got a real job. And basically his position coming back is like, Monica, I don't want to take the plantation from you. I don't want to take it over. I just want like you to keep running it essentially for me in my name, and also to like modernize some shit around here. Which honestly, like, isn't a bad deal for Monica, but Monica has, like, already worked herself up into viewing her cousin as the enemy so much that she is, like, dead set into this, like, voodoo zombie murder plan. I will say it's 1961. So slavery, definitely not within Johnny's lifespan. Johnny's, like, 30 years old. Slavery
but,
ended,
I'm thinking, like, Jim Crow and like...
Yeah. And like, what is clear is that like Johnny's grandfather owned slaves, right?
Yeah.
Because it's 100 years back when slavery ended approximately. And the things that are weird here, like, yes, Johnny has romanticized some stuff, although it's made clear that he was never allowed to play in the old abandoned slave quarters as a kid. He just wanted to. But the reason given is because like his grandfather believed in like voodoo and was like, no, like the voodoo spirits are going to come and haunt you, basically, which like fair, right?
Yeah.
And, I can see the point of view of being like, yeah, Monica, why do all the workers here still do voodoo rituals with you? And furthermore, the thing that's like maybe the most weird here, and maybe weird, not in the sense of abnormal, but weird in the sense of like, this isn't right, guys, is that all of the workers are explicitly said to be descendants of the original slaves, which means that like when, the Emancipation Proclamation made its way down to Kenilworth Plantation, everybody just kept working here.
Yeah, they're
right?
like, okay, well, I'm happy. I guess I'll stay here.
Yeah.
Never leave.
The other thing that's really interesting, of course, about all this is coming back to the low budget Uncanny Valley, right? Where because the budget is too low for them to shoot on sets, everything's on location, which ends up giving the movie like really interesting authenticity in the sense that like we're in real New Orleans, we're also like on a real plantation, which means that like they went to some plantation that still like was extant in 1961, and this is the place as they found it, which means like the room that they're saying like with the chains on the walls where they're like this was where the slaves used to be, might have been a real place for that, and the living conditions we see for the workers there might have been the actual ones. I will say Kenilworth doesn't look like it's doing well. Like,
sure.
It looks like it's falling on some hard times. And, if Johnny wanted to come in here and modernize things a little bit, maybe that would have been for the better. But I think the thing about all of this potential uncomfortable subject matter is it comes back to what you said at the start, which is that, like, there's a lot here you could mine. Yes,
absolutely. I think that you could have had something akin to like the original La Llorona of the workers, the indigenous workers, like terrorizing the colonist family.
Mm-hmm.
You could have even had something about like Monica, a white lady, is leading the voodoo.
Mm-hmm.
What if because, the plantation's on hard times, she is using zombies to supplement labor because maybe her workers are leaving because they're like, you suck ass.
Right.
And then the remaining workers are like, this sucks, and revolt against her or something. Like,
what's really interesting is, when I say that Johnny's a well-meaning asshole, the asshole part's coming from he's bought into this system and he grew up in this system. Also, sorry, dude, it's your wedding. You got married in the afternoon, and your plans for your wedding evening is to take your wife to a bunch of clubs and strip clubs.
Yeah.
And introduce her to all your clients because I guess I've
got the feeling that he was like a musician's agent.
Yes, exactly. But it's still like, that's a weird, like, buddy, like, Linda's sitting there very politely during the belly dancing, but like, come on, guy, what is up with this?
Yeah.
Anyways, what's interesting is that while Monica is our villain because she's, this strident, close-minded woman who wants to do elaborate zombie voodoo murder, she's the one leading the rituals, as you say. The other angle you could come at that with is like, oh, so maybe like the reason all the original workers are still here is because like Monica cares about them and like respects their beliefs, and they've like let her in on the voodoo because we find out that like she used to like dance in the rituals as a little girl and stuff.
Yeah.
Like she's grown up with these people. These are her people much more than like white society outside the plantation. And so she's looking to like if Johnny's going to come in here and modernize it, that means he's probably going to be like, all right, you guys are all fired. Let's bring in some like actual workers with like salaries and pay stubs and stuff. And maybe she's trying to like protect their, sort of this is their home and whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you could have mined this for more depth, but the movie's not interested in any of that. We're just interested in filling 70 minutes of celluloid.
Which I guess they succeed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about this movie?
Not really. There's not a lot to recommend here.
I wouldn't recommend this movie.
However, the runtime being so short does mean it's also not like interminably bad. Like the stuff that's padding, you laugh at how it's obviously padding, But in a lot of these movies, occasionally we'll have to pause to like go to the bathroom or grab a snack or whatever. And, we'll see, oh my God, we're only 20 minutes into this movie. I thought we'd been watching for like an hour and a half. And in this movie, we paused and we were halfway through and it was like, oh, damn, we're already halfway through. This isn't so bad.
That's true. That was a legitimate reaction. Okay, well, let's move on to ranking.
For sure.
So I had a little bit of a challenging time figuring out where to rank this.
Okay.
First, I looked at the zombie movies and voodoo movies that I mentioned at the top of the episode. The most recent one that would be pertinent here would be Zombies of Mora Tower from 1957. That's ranked at number 169. And I was like, that movie is much better, like leagues better than the Dead one.
Mm-hmm.
The next voodoo-related movie is Voodoo Island, also from 1957, currently ranked at number 236. And what I will say is at least the Dead one shows actual voodoo.
Sure.
Well, okay, asterisk of actual, because it's not like literally actual
This
voodoo.
isn't a documentary, but Voodoo Island doesn't have voodoo in it.
No, it has carnivorous plants.
Right.
So I was like, okay, so it's at least going to go above 236. Then I was like, okay, well, let's look at the point between 169 and 236. That was no help.
It's
So
a large swath.
It's a large swath. So I started kind of just like making my way down. And my eyes fell upon the Face of Marble at 228. And I was like, I wasn't a huge fan of Face of Marble. I think the Dead one, because it's short, because it had some like interesting moments, I thought that would be my floor. So 228 is my floor. Looking up, at 224 is The Invisible Ray, which is better than this movie. So my range is 225, which is Circus of Horrors, down to 228, The Face of Marble. And within that range, there's Giant from the Unknown and Man Beast. If I had to choose a spot, I would choose right between Man Beast and Face of Marble, because Man Beast had like this Yeti monster. It had a lot of that documentary footage of people like hiking in the Alps or wherever, and they integrated that pretty well. It just felt like a level of care around the filmmaking that was a step above the Dead one. So if I had to slot this in at just one particular spot, it's 227, but that was my range.
The color and the widescreen in this movie did exactly what it was meant to do, in that it does, for me, go a long way to like visually sprucing up the proceedings and making this movie feel better made than it is in a lot of ways.
I would agree with that.
It makes the movie a lot more visually interesting than it would be otherwise, and makes it feel like a real movie more than some of like the Ed Wood stuff that it's competing with down here. My range is below yours, but I'm willing to potentially like come up. What I knew about this movie was that it wasn't the worst movie we've ever seen, but it also isn't good.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not terrible, but it isn't good. So I was looking for like, what does that mean? And I started from just the bottom of the list and I started looking up. And the lowest I would go with this is 270 or 271 really. At 270, we have Night of the Ghouls, which is the unfinished sort of Ed Wood movie that didn't really come out until the 80s, that was like, he had shot that weird pilot in the theater that was all like nightmarish, and then he had to like build the rest of the movie around that to like finish it. And it was like the white ghost and the black ghost, and it was really weird and didn't make a lot of sense. And I think that's cooler than this, but this does make more sense. And I was looking up from there. That would be my floor. Where I hit for a ceiling was actually 248. We have The Playgirl and the Vampire, La Ultima Preda del Vampiro, which we just recently reviewed at 247. And I was like, that movie sucks. But, and this is where I struggled. Is this movie better? Because Playgirl and the Vampire is like trying for a twist. And it's a dumb twist, and the movie's bad. But does the fact that it was trying to do something narratively make it better than this movie, which is just like by the numbers, but like a little more competently executed by the numbers? So I was originally looking 248 to 271, especially because like looking up from here, I was like, I don't think the Dead One is better than like Song at Midnight or The Golem, you know, kind of thing, or Werewolf of London. But your floor like isn't too much higher than this. So I guess where I'm looking at is like the stuff in between your floor and my ceiling. We have a lot of mummy movies in here.
Yeah.
We've also got like Plan 9 from Outer Space.
So some of the movies that I'm seeing here in like the 240s, yes, The Golem, but I'm also seeing like Bride of the Gorilla. I see your point about The Ultimate Predator del Vampiro. That movie is just boring.
Yes.
And the twist, like they're trying to throw so many things into there that I see what you're saying, but it also just doesn't succeed at any one thing.
No.
Even at the idea of like a nudie aspect. Like this movie, the Dead One had closer nudie content than La Preda.
I would disagree, but I see what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
The movie's not good.
Well, I do see Black Moon at 252. This movie's definitely better than
Yes,
Black Moon.
Absolutely. So, I mean, what's the midpoint between 228 and 248? I guess it's 238, right? Which is The Mummy's Hand. We also have like The Mummy's Ghost right there. A couple spots above that is the Hammer Mummy movie. Mummy's Curse is at 229. Like I said, a lot of mummy movies down here. So I guess my question is this better or worse than your average mummy movie, basically?
Well, as I kind of said in the discussion, it has a lot in common with the general mummy structure.
Yes.